session right now? Okay. All right. So we had my group and group 2, and sounds like Will was chiming in on how his group approached that.
Yeah, we started with the simple average and then decided, thought better of it. Thought the weighted average was the better way to go.
Great. So if we go over here, that's actually what kind of the same process our group went through. At first we just took this simple average, and I think it came out to maybe 7.5%. And so we thought, okay, so is it under or over registering? And then we thought about that a little bit more and decided we need a little bit more information because we don't know. So, and then we learned that if we take a simple average, that is essentially just that is assuming that equal flow is passing through each one of these meters, and we know that's not the case because we went back and looked at the percent of supply volume for each of those meters. So once we know that percent of supply volume, we have all the variables we need to perform that weighted average. So for the finished water meter number 1, we took the accuracy result times the percent of source flow, and then continued to do that for the other meters. And then once we had each of those weighted weightage accuracy averages, we just summed up the total of those to get 3.3%. Our group had 3.3% over registration. Did anybody get anything different than that? Okay. So if we go over here, so now we have a number to pop in here, one number for three different meters, and we'll put in 3.3%, and we have one more field to consider whether it's over or under registration, and we just decided that it is an over registration. So again, even though we see one meter here that is significantly under registering by 15%, throughout weighted average, we know that it's in total it's representing our error as a 3.3% over registration. All right, great. We already talked about water imported. We saw that.
Drew,
yes.
Drew, sorry, I was trying to come off. I know we had a really good discussion about even when we got to that over registration, we did the quick check and looked at the total volume supplied and just said, hey, did this work? Does this make sense of the math working correctly? And again, over registration, meaning we were saying that we were putting more into the distribution system. So just a quick little spot check as we went down through it to say, yep, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. All right, so I believe, so county water utility, they did mention that they're not buying bulk water, but it does sell water in bulk to neighboring utility, Walter County. All right, so we know that water imported field is not applicable here in this situation, but they are selling some water to Walter County. So is that something that we need to consider in our water supplied section in the water audit? Okay, Nicole says yes. All right, so Nicole, what are we looking for here? If we're selling water in bulk to a neighboring community, so looks like that. So we're looking at water exported, another way of saying water exported to Walter County. So Nicole, where did you find that information in the common exercise?
It was in the table there, or I guess the third one.
Okay.
There you go. The wholesale
Okay.
exported column.
All right. Yep. So Nicole found this in the wholesale exported column. This table is titled Billing System Report, water sold in 2020 in gallons. So wholesale water or water exported commonly would be found in a billing report, but we see here that this is clearly labeled as water that is being delivered to a neighboring community here. So that appropriate field is going to be in water exported. And so we just need to bring in 888 million gallon or 888 million gallons into the water exported. All right. So just like that, right?
Break it, Drew?
No, you're a little high there.
Am I?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thanks, Trish. Yeah. So they gave that to us in gallons. So we need to make sure that we are using the correct units there in million gallons. Otherwise, we're going to have some high level of losses there. The way our water balance is going to work for us. Always a good catch. When you are gathering data for your system, you may request it from somebody, and they may give it to you in cubic feet or gallons or 1,000 gallons. You just need to make sure that we're being consistent with our units. As you're entering in this information to the water audit. By the way, in that when you're working with our team later on down the road in this program through the level 1 validation process, that is absolutely one of the things that we'll be checking as well, and going through and reviewing that information to make sure it's carried in the water audit correctly.
Got a good comment in the chat from Ross, Drew, on water imported.
Okay. All right. So Ross said I would populate water imported at 0, just so you know it was not overlooked. That is a great suggestion, Ross. That way we know that we are checked off and it has been addressed. All right. Good observation there. All right. Well, just like up in our volume from own sources, once we punch something into the water exported field, then this our error adjustment option is available to us now. So what did you guys put in for your error adjustment for your water exported to Walter County? Let's see, we've got a volume. And so again, if we're looking for information for an error adjustment for our volume from own sources, we look for any test results, testing information, test data for those meters. All right. So Ross says no data available. All right. So we mentioned earlier up here at the volume from own sources, if we don't have any test results, we don't want to guess at this, right? We want to, if we don't have any testing information on this volume from own sources, imported or exported, we'd recommend just leaving this one blank rather than guessing. So we'll do just that for our water exported, leaving that blank in the absence of any test results. All right. So now, remember those orange cells in the water audit, that's where areas are automatically calculated based on previous inputs. So the volume from own sources, the error adjustment that we have keyed in, and then the water exported have all gone into this water supplied number of 7,098 million gallons. So when we entered in the first volume from in sources, it appeared 8250. Once we plugged in the error adjustment of 3.3%, it automatically made that calculation there. So if we do have an error adjustment, we want to make sure it goes in the appropriate field and not automatically included here in our volume from in sources. And then when we put in our water exported volume here, that actually backed out that volume, so it's not included in our water audit boundary. All right, so a quick pause there for any questions there on water supplied.
Looks
Okay.
good. That's how our group landed on things, Drew.
Okay, great. So I'll tell you what, guys, let's go down to authorized consumption, and we'll work through billed metered, but we will, and then we'll pause there just for sake of time, but we will provide we can provide what those entries were for the water audit, just so you guys can check against it. But let's cover our billed metered authorized consumption as well. So on this one, what are some of the first questions we should ask ourselves about our authorized consumption? And our categories here can kind of give us a tip of what are some of the questions we need to ask ourselves. And Ross, I see your hand up. I don't know if that was from earlier or if that's directed to the authorized consumption question.
Actually, it's addressed to the volume from own sources. I'm just wondering on the rounding, that first number was rounded. How much rounding should we be doing on these? I mean, you didn't round the last number, the 888.375.
Yep.
Okay,
Good question.
Or should we not be rounding? I mean, 0.4 of a million gallons is a lot of water, at least on some of our systems. That might be more than the whole year if we're serving a few homes.
No, you're absolutely right, Ross. So the water audit will take the digits to the thousandth of the unit there. So putting that number in, that's the way we would approach it.
Drew, our group had a good idea because it's all in Excel and your data's in blank sheet. They decided to just do an equals in that cell and then click on the one in the calculation sheet and do a direct cell reference rather than manually keying in a number. Great.
Yep, one of the opportunities now available to us through the blank sheet option. Simple and effective. All right, great observation, Ross. On the topic of authorized consumption, Rolanda put in the chat that we need to first ask ourselves: Are we billing our customers? Are we metering our customers? What does that look like in our system? And so for the county water utility, were they billing and metering any of their customers? And it looks like we have, so they are metering. All CWU customers are metered. All right. And we have down here, we have our billing report. We have our broken down. Looks like we have our time frame by month. We've got these two different classes here, our residential and non-residential. We know that we've already considered our wholesale or exported volumes here. So we've got some billed metered consumption here with residential and non-residential. So what did you guys find for that number in the water audit? can also go over to our blank sheet here. So our group went and kind of approached it the same way. We know we got burned the first time on our on trusting our whoever put together the water production. So we went and just wanted to cross check all of the volumes here for our residential and our non-residential. And this table looked to be correct. So no errors in the data. But as Trish pointed out, we do need to make sure that we are using the right units here. So we have our total of our residential and our total non-residential in gallons. If we just sum those up and divide by a million to get million gallons, then we can get 5363.125 million gallons here. All right, so let's do what Will suggested and just put an equal sign in there and go over to our blank sheet and pop that in there. Did anybody get a different number for their billed metered authorized consumption? Okay. All right. Well, there were a few other consumption figures in there, but wanted to at least go through water supplied and the largest volume for this exercise, the largest volume in authorized consumption, just to give you guys an introduction to, you have this data that has been gathered, and then we need to take a closer look at it to make sure that we're bringing it into the audit correctly. Those are the steps that Will laid out yesterday in the presentation, and these are the same steps that you guys are going to be tasked with, of gathering your own data, taking a close look at it before keying it into the water audit. So that really rounds out our exercise here for developing the inputs. But as we've noted, we'll need to, in order to get any kind of results over here on our dashboard tab, what needs to be done is to enter in all of the input values here in our water audit. But then we also know that we're looking at our water loss results and our non-revenue water results in terms of volume, value, and validity. So validity that we're going to turn to now is one of those aspects where we're looking at the practices and policies within our system to really understand how reliable that number is. So this 8250 million gallons, we have that number from the data. That's great. We have some test results. That's great. Now we want to understand how we're collecting that data and any maintenance that we're doing on those meters or equipment that's related to collecting that information. So less on accuracy, more on our practices surrounding that number. So we're going to pivot here to a few presentation materials on data validity. That should bring us up to our break for today, and then we'll bring up county water utility again, and we'll walk through. We'll look at a couple of the data validity grades for some select inputs there. So one last pause just to see if there are any questions on any of the inputs that we keyed in for this exercise before we move to data validity.
The unbilled, unbilled metered, the number there.
Yep. So we there is a number there just for the interest of time, Ross. We decided to cap it here at billed metered. But yeah, we didn't go through each of the inputs here. But there was a volume there noted that there were two treatment plants that were using some water that they were metering, but they just weren't billing for it. So that was a component there that we accounted for. All right. Any comments from the Kavanaugh side before moving to data validity? Okay.
Good here.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop my screen share, Steve, and I'm going to hand it off to you to tell us, introduce the concept of data validity to us.
Very good. And I'm going to need to get a confirmation on the correct screen when we get there. So let's get here and share screen. All right.
I've got your, yeah, there you go, Steve. Looks good.
All right, we're in a good spot there. All right, so data validity, and let's check latency too. I was having a little bit of trouble with that earlier, Drew. So if it looks like it's dragging, I'll drop camera. So just give me a thumbs up and I'll try to peek over to that. So very quickly to introduce the concept of data validity. We've been talking about through the M36 methodology of really getting for the first time our water balance. And that's what we've gone through and preparing the audit, doing the inputs. We also will look at it and say, you know, does this information, is it valid? How reliable is the information in our audit? And really looking at it and starting to ask good questions about the source of the data, where it comes from, and to assign a level of reliability to that. And that's what the data grading actually is in the free water audit software. So just again, kind of in that stage one, this is that level one validation. And looking at it to refresh, we want to see our information in terms of the volume, the value, and certainly the valid is the information. So in the free water audit software, and you probably saw this to the right, we had Drew click on the notes tab, the N, and actually got to kind of that information to be able to pull up that tab. If you see the G, this is for the data grading. And, you know, what is validity grade? What is a grade on each of the inputs? It really is looking at the practices within the utility. And some may be how we collect the data, how we go through and review that data, how we look at you know, the maintenance on equipment that we have, the instruments as an example. And the way that the data validity grading is established is it's numerical and based on the certain practices that we do and the questions that I'll open up here in just a minute. We've got this interactive grading, and we'll be assigning a grade between 1 and 10, where 1 means really that we are maybe they're crude estimates. We don't really measure it, where 10 may be a very, very refined way in which we are having data that's looked at and it's repeatable. We've got corroborating information, practices, policies that the utility has had in place. And they really, the criteria are predominantly qualitative. So it's really asking information. And this is why we actually broke the training up into 2 pieces, developing the inputs, making sure that we're putting the right numbers in the boxes, if you will. And this is now helping us get a measure of the reliability, not accuracy. That's an important distinction that we have. So again, the way it works within the software itself, you'll click the G to determine the data validity grades. And it actually opens up for each of our inputs, as an example, volume from own sources at the top there. It opens up an interactive data grading matrix. If any of you have ever worked with TurboTax, it's a similar type of concept in that based on the answers, it will open or make available a next question. This is an important piece because, and most of you don't have experience with version 5 of the software, but it was a little bit more challenging to read, and you had to make the determination if you met this particular criteria. is very straightforward. If you see what's opened up there on volume on sources, item number 8, it says, have testing and calibration procedures been closely scrutinized for compliance with procedures as described in the AWWA M36 manual. And then it gives really 3 options: at plus minus 6% or greater, between, or at or within plus or minus 3%. So it's very defensible and repeatable. And it also gives uniformity from year to year as practices improve, or we get a little more robust about that. You may have not have had it at that point, but now you do. And so what it does is, again, it allows you to really be able to see your progress over time. And also across a data set of utilities, being able to have the consistency there. So again, the way that you work through this, and we'll do this when we get into the exercise again, is we will answer questions, which then will help us get to the correct, the accurate data grading for that particular input. The exciting thing about this also is it actually establishes what the limiting criteria is. So in this case, the limiting criteria that meant that you couldn't go any higher in the data grading in this case was the frequency of in situ flow accuracy testing. Less than annual, but within the last 5 years. We'll explain this when we're in our small groups of what some of these questions mean, because some of it could be kind of new nomenclature that you haven't done or you're not familiar with. But the idea here that we're trying to show within the software is it really does give you a chance to see how you can make improvements in the reliability of that particular input. And this one, for volume from own sources, the limiting criteria that limits us to a 7 is in that in situ flow accuracy testing. So again, just a couple of things to understand as we go through when we're assigning those data grades, and how those questions will open up as we go along. So it is a total within the water audit itself. And so the question we would ask is 100 the best number? And it kind of gets to the way that we are conditioned through the report card approach of, well, gosh, if my data validity score in aggregate for the audit is a 50 or a 62, then that's not good. The answer is that that's not true, because really it's not a report card. It's not a measure. It's an understanding of where the utility is at the point in time that you're starting this process of to get to the proper understanding of the reliability. Why this is important is the chart on the left, and that is that as our certainty increases, we're more confident in actually taking action. Really kind of improving and sort of clockwise from bottom left, the steps if we've got uncertain data and low losses, that we need to improve on our information and the source information that's backing it up to get more accurate data. If we still have low losses and accurate data, then probably we're doing what we need to be doing. And if we have high certainty and high losses, then we're probably ready and prepared to take action to move forward. So kind of getting some wrap on this, and that is that, our quality matters, and obviously it's the garbage in, garbage out side of things, but we want to really understand our uncertainty. How are we in terms of accuracy of the information that we're putting in, estimates versus measured, and really trying to improve that. The major sources that we see of error are in the actual instruments themselves, databases at which the information is stored, people gathering of the information and relaying of that information, and then also looking at it in terms of information that you just haven't been gathering. And we had a good discussion in our group yesterday of, it may be that it's system use, and some of it's estimates, some of it we've never really started tracking how much we're flushing or how much there's fire department usage, etc. So let me maybe pause there and see if that brings up any questions on just sort of presented, because our next step is to go through the data grading side of this and to assign a data grade for each of the inputs with our system there, the example system. Drew, let me go to you first. Anything else to maybe highlight on before I'll open it up to the bigger group?
Hey, Steve, thanks for giving us that information. I think you hit the highlights there, is that the data validity grades are more qualitative in nature. So they're not a measure of accuracy in that scale of 1 to 10, but it's more a reflection of those practices that are in place. And as you go up that scale in the data validity grade from 1 to 10 for each input, the scale of practices goes up in rigor. So at a 10, we're doing all the checks and balances and maintenance on the best practices that we could be doing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that for each input we should aspire to have a data validity grade of 10 for every input.
Yep.
In fact, because there's a cost and an effort to maintain those practices, and so finding out what practice you would like to at least assess whether it's feasible to insert in your system, or whether that's a top priority for your system. This tool and the data validity grading process can help with that. So those are the only things I would add and reinforce from what you've already said, Steve.
Sounds good. Let's open it up. Other questions about the terminology, data validity, reliability, accuracy, anything that is coming to question? Okay, Drew, I'm gonna punt back to you and get us to our next step, I guess. Are we close to a break, maybe?
We are nearly there, Steve. Before we cut for a 10-minute break, I want to.
Eagle's got a question.
Oh,
I see a
okay.
hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question. I'm looking at some of the validity question and answers, and there's like a question on data transfer errors, and as part of the electronic calibration process. Now, I'm trying to understand, is this a question about if we're collecting data through our SCADA system, and if we are calibrating those electronic processes? Is that correct?
Yeah, so very quickly, when we get into the small groups, let's make sure that we spend an appropriate amount of time, but there is signal calibration. So this is, in many cases, the signal span, the 4 to 20 milliamp, where 4 milliamps equals zero flow and 20 milliamps would equal full flow, as an example. And then basically the instrumentation side of that versus a flow verification. So a secondary measuring device or some way that you're actually doing a comparative test. So when we get into small groups, we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about and describing that. Good question, though.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions from the participants on the line? Okay. If no other questions, then we're going to bring in everybody's favorite test your knowledge game. Today's special with a little St. Patrick's Day theme here. But get your thumbs ready if you're participating on a mobile device. we're gonna launch a couple questions here through our Kahoot application. And I'll go ahead and get the first one turning here. All right. Give folks a chance to sign in and enter that PIN number. I don't think we have any Kahoot newbies on the line today, so everybody's gone through this setup process.
Just in case, why don't you do a verbal on that number, Drew?
Sure. The PIN number, if you're looking to, if you've gone to kahoot.it and it's asking you for a PIN, the PIN number is 6444754. All right, and it looks like we have most people that are signed in here. Okay, all right, so we'll go ahead and, oh, Lynette came in just under the gun there. All right. Let me give 5 more seconds here for anybody else to join in. All right. Okay, so here we go. We'll launch the first one here. All right, on data validity, got some true false questions. Data validity grades document utility practices of data collection, data review, and instrument maintenance. All right, so most of us got that one correct. So it is more. Steve shared with us on that first slide that it is more of a review or an assessment of how we're collecting that data, any maintenance that we're doing to that instrumentation. So think about even to Eagle's question on the testing that's being done on those supply meters, whether it's that flow accuracy test or electronic calibration test. How are we doing any of those, and how frequently are we doing it? So good job on that one, guys. All right, so the next one. Okay, Nicole had the quick response on that one. Otis, a close second there. All right, here we go. Data validity grades measure the accuracy of data inputs, true or false. All right. All right, so most of us got that one as well. So false, similar to the previous question. We want to our data validity grades are not necessarily measuring how accurate the data is, and we'll see that through some of the data validity grades that we look at. It's more along the lines of what are those practices that we have implemented in our system surrounding that number. All right. Looks like infrastructure leakage index has snuck into the lead somehow. All right, I'm enjoying this this leaderboard here. Okay, next true or false question. The overall data validity score, which is a scale out of 100, should be looked at in terms of an A, B, C, D, or F letter grade. True or false? All right, great. So false. False is the correct answer. Steve showed us that slide that had 100. Is 100 the best number? The data validity score. So all of your individual data validity grades for each input. On the dashboard tab once the audit is complete, it will give you an overall data validity score on a scale of 100. So we're all conditioned to to think that 100 is the best number. And I asked my son that one time, asked him what the best number is, and he said 100. That's easy. 100 is the best number. And this was before he was even receiving any letter grades in school. So we're just all conditioned to think that is the best number. But we would recommend or encourage you to look at not specific what that data validity score is, but where you fall in the overall data validity tiers that we looked at on that loss control planning tab on your water audit, which gives you a lot more insight as to what next steps are available to you based on that data validity score. I think said a different way, if your data validity score is 35 out of 100, great. What that means is you've gone through that process, and through the limiting criteria that the software will identify for us, we now have these different options that we can consider implementing in our system that will improve the reliability of our data. So, for example, volume from own sources is an easy one to give an example for. If we've never done any testing on our supply meters, then we have a lower level of reliability in that number, if we can all agree on that. Versus if we are doing volumetric testing every year on our supply meters, then we have a higher certainty in that number, right? So if we're not doing any supply meter testing on those meters, then our consideration there is to at least begin to assess how feasible that might be to insert that into our practices. And that's going to look different for everybody. Again, there's a cost and an effort that is attached to that. So maybe it's looking at supply meter testing further down the road, or maybe it's taking a smaller step of doing testing every other year, or whatever that looks like and is comfortable and is appropriately prioritized for your utility. All right, let's see what it's going to bring up the podium here. All right, ILI in third, Eagle came up in second, and drum roll for testing our data validity, Otis. All right, great job, Mr. Begay. And we've got our runner-ups there as well. Fantastic job in testing your knowledge, folks. I've got right at 1/2 the hour. So let's come back in 10 minutes, and then we will get started. We'll break everybody out into our breakout rooms again, and we'll tee up the common exercise of assessing the data validity grades. We're not going to do it for the full audit. We're just going to walk through a couple select inputs so you can get acclimated to how that the interactive data grading matrix works here. But let's take a 10-minute break and then come back and jump back into it. Thanks, guys. All right. I think we have hopefully have everybody back by now, and we're going to jump into the next installment of our workshop here today, and that's going to be another breakout exercise. And excuse me, we're going to be tasked with assigning the data validity grades for a couple of those key inputs that we've already developed through the previous exercise. So for this one, we already have the common exercise that we can look at. We notice that it has information on there. It has the data that we use to plug in some of the inputs. But if we look at it a little more closely, it also tells us that about some of the practices and policies that are the county that are in the county water utility. So now we're looking more at some of that text in the common exercise to learn, you know, what are the practices surrounding their water supply? What are some of those practices surrounding their authorized consumption? So the task at hand in your groups, in your breakout groups, it would probably take us the rest of the time and more to go through all of the inputs. So we're just gonna tackle 2 specific inputs here for this breakout exercise. But want you guys to walk through each of the questions, and your instructor in your breakout room will also tell you about the different intricacies with each question and responses there. So we're going to be looking specifically at volume from own sources with county water utility and billed metered authorized consumption. So those are the 2 largest volumes in the water audit for county water utility, and then we will we'll walk through the data validity grade for each of those. So we'll also keep in mind as we're walking through those questions, watch how the instructor or if you guys are if the utility's on the line in your rooms, if you guys are driving screen, however you're doing it, pay attention to how you move through the interactive data grading process, how it generates the data validity grade once all questions have been an answer has been selected for all those questions, and also pay attention to the limiting criteria. It's going to be on the right-hand side of your screen as you're going through those questions. That is what it's going to identify what that limiting criteria is, which in the exercise for county water utility, it will give them some guidance onto what practices they might consider implementing in their system. So it's going to be the same thing when you guys are doing this with your own utility specific data. The software will identify what those limiting criteria might be to help you understand what next steps are going to be available to you to improve the reliability of your data. All right, so before I send everybody off to their breakout rooms, does anybody have any questions on this next exercise? Assigning the data validity grade for volume from own sources and billed metered authorized consumption.
Just one comment, again, sort of give us a parameter of the time at which you'd like to sort of have these 2 done within.
Yeah, I think that that we should be able to assign the data validity grade for just these 2 inputs. Let's start with a window of 30 minutes, and we'll come back and walk through it. But I'll check in with the groups a little bit before that just to see where everybody is. I think that should be sufficient time to cover two inputs there. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and send everybody off to their breakout rooms now. All right, looks like the gang's all here. All right. And Jonathan, if you can hear us, you're probably going off to room 1 here in just a second. There he goes. Okay. Let's see here. Let me share my screen. Okay. So first, just any questions, guys, that may have come up in those slides that Steve shared with respect to data validity, or or any of the what we're trying to accomplish here in this common exercise?
I'm good.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. All right. So let me there we go. Sorry, I've got about a million screens open right now. Okay, so the two inputs that we're looking to assign the data validity grades are going to be volume from own sources and our build metered authorized consumption. If we work our way through these, then we can take a look at some other ones just to get a better understanding of what kind of questions are being asked for those. But our goal is to assess this data validity grade for both of those. And if we, just to orient ourselves again, the G that's indicated here beside each input, let me zoom in just a tad bit, guys. This G noted here, that'll take us to the correct interactive data grading for that particular input. So for volume from own sources, we'll go ahead and click that. And we have a blank form here, basically, that we need to fill out. And this has 11 questions for volume from own sources. So all of these are going to be related to our practices and any kind of instrumentation maintenance surrounding our volume from own sources for the utility narrative. So we'll need to refer back to that as well. And I know that not everybody has that PDF in front of them, so we'll look at it together. We'll bring it up and look at it together. But some of these questions we can probably answer right off the bat here. So the first one is, did the water utility supply any water from its own sources during the audit year? So what do you guys think we should put for that one? I should show you the answer selections too. It's a simple yes or no question on that one.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Nicole. So yes, we know that this utility, 100% of its water is produced in volume from own sources. All right, so now we're interested in learning what percent of our volume from own sources are metered. And let me bring up the and actually I can. Here we go. So we still have our blank sheet over here, so I can use that as a resource too.
You do have a lot of screens open.
I'll tell you.
You're doing a good job.
So we have, so we know all of our water is produced from our volume from own sources, and we've already learned through the developing the inputs, we have three different meters here. And as far as we could tell from the narrative, there's no other source of supply. So it looks like all of our water is running through these 3 meters. So if we're tasked with understanding what percent of our supply volume is metered, there we go. What do you guys think? I'd say 100%, right? 100% of our volume from own sources is metered. Everything's passing through those 3 meters, right? All right. And so, Nicole, let's think about just kind of how that might look for the one system where we drew that water audit boundary. we're still gonna we would still have 100% metered, but if you recall, 2 of those well meters in that system where we drew the water audit boundary were registering the raw water, and then they fed into that treatment facility, and then there was no effluent meter registering the flow leaving that treatment facility. Ideally, if we had a meter there, that's at that treatment facility, that's what we would use. But think for a moment, if we didn't have a meter on those 2 wells, but then we had a meter on that well 3 that was feeding directly into the distribution system, then at that point, we would only have we would not have 100% of our sources, our volume from sources metered, right?
Mhm.
So we would, that's one scenario where we would not see greater than 99% here. And that may look different. I know you guys, both of the utilities on the line manage multiple systems. So if you're putting together the water audit for that, then it may look different from system to system. But and maybe that's a good question. Do any of you guys, for any of your systems, is any of the supply volume unmetered, like totally unmetered?
It's metered for Mescalero, but if we have one that's down, then it wouldn't be metered. But we try to get them up and running as quickly as possible.
Gotcha. Yep. How about you, Nicole?
No, there were wells that were unmetered that fed directly into the system, but we've managed to abandon those wells.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's good. And so to Chris's point, certainly there is the potential for a meter to go down for repairs, and then we work to get it back online. But that's good that we have all of our supply source that is metered. Again, we would look to estimate somehow what that supply is if they weren't all metered, but that's a good start that we have all of that, the supply sources metered for all of our systems there.
And just a quick question about that one. That would most likely be a weighted average as well, because looking at our system with the 3 wells, not all those wells produce the same amount of volume. So we have
right.
Okay.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So we're looking at the percent of the supply volume. So that's a great distinction, Nicole. So it's not necessarily in that scenario I gave you with your system that we worked through the water audit boundary. It's not the percentage of meters, but the percentage of the volume that's metered. So so if we go back to that scenario in Santa Clara, if wells 1 and 2 did not have a meter on it, but well 3 was delivering more than 99% of the source flow, or whatever percentage of the source of the volume it was delivering, then that would be the appropriate selection there.
Okay.
Yep. Great observation there. Why are we looking at percent of supply volume? So this next section here says for questions 2 through 10, we want to choose the answer that applies for those meters that measure at least 90% or at least 90% or above of the finished water volume. So these next questions are going to be specific to any meter testing practices. Okay. So we're looking at accuracy testing. So in that example, we saw that county water utility was doing some accuracy testing. The other type of testing that it's looking at is electronic calibration. So a lot of times when folks hear calibration, they think of calibrating the actual meter itself to bring it back into a particular range of accuracy. This one is actually looking at, is testing if your meters, if you guys have meters that are tied to a SCADA system, it's checking that 4 to 20 milliamp signal span that is communicating whatever the meter is registering, that is converting it to a flow. So no meter is registering flow. It's registering something else. So on a turbine meter, it's registering revolutions. On a Venturi meter, it's registering pressure differential, and then it's there. The computer system is actually converting whatever that meter is registering, converting that to a flow. So there is an electronic signal that is doing that conversion to a flow, and if that signal span is out of range, then that conversion can start to drift a little bit and give us an inaccurate volume that is archived in our SCADA system. If we don't have a SCADA system, then that electronic calibration criteria is not applicable. But if we do have a SCADA system, we want to ask ourselves if we have that electronic calibration process in place. And then the secondary device and tertiary device, these are really just help us to define. We'll see in the criteria in just a moment. These are helping us to define what types of devices are actually being checked for any data transfer error. So the next question here is, what is the frequency of electronic calibration? Okay, so let me show you just our responses here first. So it's less than annual, but within the last 5 years, annually, semi-annually, so at least twice in a year. And then the last one, as we mentioned, not applicable due to electronic signal output. Otherwise, we don't have our meters connected to a SCADA system. So let's take a look at our friends at County Water Utility. So we've already noted that they have 100% of their supply from own sources. And it looks like their drinking water supply is measured with 2 water flow meters, which are mag meters, that are electronically read by a SCADA system on a real-time basis. Okay, great. So let's keep that in mind. So we know they have a SCADA system in place. And let's see, we have, so they have drinking water supplied through a turbine meter on that supplemental well. So now we know what type of meters they have, and that they have a SCADA system in place. All right. A couple other information: meter is read and data reviewed monthly, but has never been calibrated or flow tested. Okay, that's that export meter to Walter County, looks like. All right, so let's drill down here. The system supply is measured by the 2 meters is logged daily, and summary flow data is reviewed on a monthly basis. All right, let's keep that in mind. That sounds like practices that they have in their system. All right. So let's see here. All right, we're looking for electronic calibration. So it looks like down here we've got the electronic signals from the 2 electromagnetic meters are calibrated on a semi-annual basis, and data errors are checked for secondary and tertiary devices. All right, so let's stop right there and see if that will help us define our selection here. Okay, so it says semi-annually, so that's one of our choices there. So great, we know that we can check that box off. All right, now what level of data transfer errors are checked as part of that electronic calibration? It says that both the secondary and the tertiary devices are checked. So our secondary device up here, if we are wondering what that might mean, that can include that conversion to milliamps or a meter transmitter or any other similar instrumentation. So basically the primary device is the meter. The secondary device is whatever is converting that, what the meter is reading, into a flow. And then that tertiary device is where that data goes to live. So if you have a SCADA archive system or a historian, then that would be known as your tertiary device. In this particular example, they are checking both the secondary and the tertiary. So that's one of our options to select there. Okay, you saw another option that this last one, data transfer errors are checked on a secondary device, but we don't have a tertiary device. So so all bases are covered here, but for the county water utility, this one is the appropriate response. And let's see, so the next question is the most recent electronic calibration documentation available for review. Now, we know we had some, up here we had volumetric test results, but I don't see any information on the results from their electronic calibration. So we need to, that's going to have, whether we are able to provide those test reports or not, is going to have an impact on what we select here in our data validity grade. So for this one, we don't have any documentation, so we'll go ahead and select no there. Okay. All right, and so now, so that's it for electronic calibration. So now the next question is asking us the frequency of in situ flow accuracy testing or volumetric testing, like county water utility. We know that they are doing that. So our first question is asking us how frequently are they doing that? So we know we had some test results from 2020, but do we know how frequently they're conducting those tests?
Once every 3 years?
Yep, that's it. Thanks, Nicole. So the flow verification tests are performed once every 3 years. So let's take a look and see what that may mean. All right. These responses here are going to look very similar to the frequency for electronic calibration. So none or not within the last 5 years. We're not doing it annually, but we've done it within the last 5 years or annually. So we know it's not annual, it's not semi-annual. So we need less than annual, but within the last 5 years looks to be appropriate for their frequency of testing. All right. And next is the most recent accuracy test available for review. And we know that it is because we've already evaluated and did that weighted average for it. So we can say yes. What are the total volume weighted average results of the flow accuracy testing? All right, so here, all right, so a note here, we mentioned that data validity grade, these data validity grades is not a measure of accuracy. This is probably, this is the only exception here where it's not, where it's asking us to pick a range of where that error adjustment fell. So this is probably the only exception in the water audit software where it's speaking to the accuracy of that error adjustment input. But we know that we calculated this one. Let's see, let me let Troy in the room here. We calculated this one to be 3.3% over registration. So it's between 3 and 6%. So that would be the appropriate choice there. And then it's asking us if these tests were done in compliance with the M36 or M33 manuals. For this one, let's just assume that it was done. Typically, when a utility has a test performed It's typically done by a third party. Not always. Sometimes those tests are being done in-house, but the more the tests that require a specialist to perform, those are usually done through a third party, and those were usually provided a test report. Hey, Troy, how are you? Welcome back. And when those third parties will always be using a compliance with those M36
She wanted
and
lunch,
M30.
so we had leftovers, so I gave her the last pieces that we had.
All right. And so the next question is, which best describes the frequency of the water meter readings? So I think we got a little bit of information on that one. I think that was up here. All right, so we said supply is measured daily and reviewed monthly.
Fucking trying to do all this shit at once.
Hey, Troy, welcome back to the group.
Hey.
Hey there. All right. So we know that it's read daily and reviewed on a monthly basis. So let's go back and check out what that looks like. So the meter readings, so we said read daily, right? And the last question here is looking for the frequency of the review. So that's checking for any gaps in the data. If you're taking manual reads or you're collecting data from your SCADA, just checking those two different volumes to make sure there's no gaps in the data or nothing crazy is going on. So they said that they're doing that on a monthly basis. All right. And so actually, let's so on the daily basis, I think that they said, let's go back here because I think they actually said that they have connected to SCADA and their reads are in real time. So let's make sure we didn't apply anything differently here. Log daily and summary flow. Okay, so I think with the SCADA logged in real time, we can choose the more rigorous response here, which is a continuous in real time that they're logging that data. Okay.
It said that they were reading it monthly. There isn't like for the last question.
Okay.
So would that be once a month or? I guess why did you select less frequently than monthly?
Oh, I didn't mean to actually. Okay. Sorry, I chose the wrong one. Once per month, yes.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So that brings us to, and so now once we have each of those responses in there, all right. Review of the errors. Okay. Okay. All right. So each of these are, once these are answered, you see the data validity grade out of 10 has been automatically populated, right? And then over here on the right-hand side, this limiting factor, keeping this from, the limiting factor from keeping this from being a data validity grade of 7 or higher is this particular practice, which best describes the frequency of the data review, right? So before we had it incorrectly as less than monthly, we changed it to once a month, and it went from a data validity grade from a 4 to a 6. So this will happen for each individual input and data validity grade there. And it's kind of, it'll give you some guidance of what practices you might want to consider. So In that really easy example there, if we were doing it less than monthly, a review of the data less than monthly, and we said, oh, okay, well, to improve our data, let's just increase the frequency in which we're reviewing that information. And that brought us to a data validity grade of 6. And you can, once you are doing this with your own utility, you can start to play around with this. So think for a moment, if we were doing our flow meter accuracy testing more frequently, right? So maybe we wanted to see what it would look like if we were doing this on an annual basis. Oops. Sorry, I got a little lag in my screen here. All right, annual basis, and then and then looking at some other responses here. Maybe if we were doing our electronic calibration, if we had the testing that was available. And so you can kind of play around with different selections here and see how the limiting criteria will start to change around, and the well, I'm picking all the wrong ones here. If we had sorry guys, this is moving really slow. If we had, maybe we're doing testing electronic calibration semi-annually, maybe if we were doing also doing the volumetric testing semi-annually, that would be kind of above and beyond the best practices there. It's taking a while to populate there. And maybe we were doing these, checking these a little bit more frequently than on a monthly basis, right? So then our data validity grade would shoot up to an 8. Also, that keeping that limiting criteria at the frequency that we're reviewing the data. So, once you're doing this with your utility, and we go through and we validate the water audit, and you all of these responses are trued up, then we can start to use that limiting criteria that's on the right-hand margin as a roadmap, kind of as to what practices we might want to consider. It may be that we say, okay, that's my limiting criteria of the frequency of review, but I don't know, I feel like reviewing it on a weekly basis is good enough, and that's absolutely a possible way of approaching this. Or you may say, okay, let's review it every business day to the highest that highest selection there in rigor, and be that much more confident about the data going into our water audit. All right. Any questions there with the volume from own sources? I'm going to try to close some of these screens here so I can get a little bit better response time here. All right. Let's go to the other one we wanted to hit was build metered authorized consumption. All right. So again, we'll hit the G next to the input field there, and it's going to walk us through. We've got 8 questions here that we want to look at. So the first one is, were customers metered in the audit year? So that first question is really just kind of a, is this question or is this input applicable to you or not? For this one, we know that we did have, it said all of their customers are metered. So we would say yes. And for that first question, it's asking us for those billed metered accounts, what % of the bills are estimated? So in their meter reading process, if for any reason they can't get a read on their meters, then they might go back and attempt a reread. And if that's not possible, they may have to estimate some of those reads. So it looks like for county water utility, we had one section that was specifically for metering and billing. So we know all customers are metered here, and let's see, we have meters. Meters are read on a monthly basis. All right. Each month, approximately 2% of reads have to be estimated. Okay, so now we know that they do have to estimate some of those reads, and it's approximately 2%. Okay, for most metered utilities, it's typically less, 5% or less. That's a common response there. How often does the utility read its customer meters? Okay, so I think they said that they are reading their customer meters on a monthly basis. Is that right? Yeah, here we go. Monthly. All right. For you guys, while we're keying this one in, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the only billed meter consumption that we discussed that's applicable in your systems would be those construction meters, those temporary construction meters. Is that right? Or do you guys have any other billed metered consumption?
What was the question, Drew?
Yeah, it was. I was just trying to recall in your system. I know any billed metered consumption in Mescalero or Santa Clara is very minimal. But was it just that those construction meters where you guys have any billed metered consumption?
For Mescalero, it's just for construction mostly.
Okay.
We don't have any other metered.
Okay. And Nicole, was that the same in Santa Clara? Okay, Nicole may have stepped away there. All right. So the next question is looking at whether the consumption volumes have been prorated. What that means is, so we're looking at this audit in a 12-month period, right? So we have our supply volumes by month. So we know that volume, we take that volume at the end of the month. When we're looking at customer meters, those are typically read at different times, right? They may be read once every 2 months, or they may be read in the middle of the month. So basically, the supply volumes in our audit and the consumption volumes, they're not always in the same time frame. And so you can prorate those to bring them into the same time frame, which could make a difference in calculating your total water loss volume. In this one particular, they are not doing that, and that's also pretty typical in a system as well. They're asking, how frequently does internal review by utility staff of this one occur? How frequently does internal review by utility staff of billed metered consumption occur? All right, and so they are for this one, I believe they are looking at our responses. Our options here are less than annually, less annually, more frequently than annually, or each billing cycle. So for this one, they're doing an internal review each billing cycle. Most likely they're doing a spot check to make sure the bills are going out correctly. So that falls in line with how often they're doing that review. So this one kind of depends on, for any of that billed metered use for county water utility, it just depends on how frequently those bills are going out. And what level of detail is examined in the internal review. So again, they might be doing just some spot checks just to make sure that the bills are being calculated correctly before they go out to customers. They could be looking at the total consumption of customer class, just to make sure that the volumes that they've been recording are matching up with the amount of bills that are going out. And they might be looking at customer classes with specific accounts that are being targeted for an audit that might have some high or low consumption that are flagging it. So for this one in the narrative, it's showing that the total group, they're grouping this by customer class and doing an internal review to that extent. And then the most recent billing data review by someone who is independent of the utility process. All right. So in this one, I think, there we go. It does not specifically say that. So in the sheet, so that's information we don't know, or in the narrative, they didn't offer it, so we don't know that information. So we're going to say 5 years ago, more than 5 years ago, or we're just not sure, which is an appropriate selection. So here's something. So when you see we made that selection, the next question disappeared on us. So there is some logic built into this interactive data grading to where previous responses will make subsequent responses no longer valid or no longer applicable. So that question that went away was asking us what level of detail was examined by an independent, by someone who's independent of the utility billing process. So we said we didn't know to when, if that was even occurring. So that next question is no longer valid to us. So here we see we have two limiting criteria here as well, right? All right, let me let everybody know that we're bringing them back into the room here in just a little bit. All right, so over here we have, oh, shucks, that didn't go, okay. We have our limiting criteria here. So if we wanted to just kind of play around with it, so one of our limiting criteria is prorated to represent consumption. And so we said that county water utility is not doing that. So again, that prorating the volumes for the supply volumes to match within the same timeline as the consumption volumes. So again, another example of that is maybe we have January supply volumes, but we're reading these meters on we're on a bi-monthly schedule. So we have January supply volumes matched up with December and November consumption volumes. So those volumes are not within the same time frame. So that's essentially what this question is asking, as if any proration has been done to that to bring those volumes into the same time frame. So maybe county water utility wants to look into that and see if they can address that And also they want to look into further and confirm with their staff whether they've had anybody who is independent of the billing process come in and do a review. And maybe they found out that they did that and it was done within the last 3 years, and then this question will open up. So that's just a way to demonstrate that there's some logic built into this interactive data grading that will remove questions based on previous responses, and it will auto populate that data validity grade based on these selections, and also identify that limiting criteria. All right, I know the build metered authorized consumption isn't the most applicable input for the utilities on the line for this exercise, but again, this common exercise is to reinforce really the key concepts of the M36 methodology, the water balance, and introduce you guys to the data validity grading. So for this question, for you guys on the line, it's going to be mostly, this build metered is going to be mostly geared towards the construction, those construction meters that you're construction use that you're metering and billing for. But the majority of your authorized consumption sounds like is going to be an unbilled and unmetered. So that's where your biggest number is going to be in your respective water audits. So it'll look a little flip-flopped here. So your biggest number is going to be down here rather than in billed metered. So so then we would address how we are determining that in something that's unbilled and unmetered, right? How well understood is the extent of the unbilled, unmetered use, which best describes the records that are kept for events of unbilled, unmetered use, and how is the majority of that use estimated? So these are some of the questions in looking at your utility specific data that we'll dive into, and also talk a little bit more about how we can best put together some estimates there. All right, Will, you're crashing my breakout room.
I was compelled to do it. It yanked me back into this one, Drew.
Gotcha.
Yeah, same. We were having some good discussions. So anyway, we're close enough to call it close enough.
Also, I'm glad to be back with you, Drew. I'm good. It's good to see you as well.
Hey,
Likewise.
Hey, while everybody's gathering, I just want you to know that in the consumption and meter reading, we just caught one, which is, it says the volumes delivered to Walter County. So Walter County, if we remember our description, is actually our neighboring county. So there's a little bit of a nice little tweak.
I'm not following
there.
I'm not following. What's the find there?
So it shouldn't be that all facilities are metered. The volumes to Walter County reviewed monthly for discrepancy. So is this Walter County? Is this our CMU? Or is this talking about only our neighboring county? So.
I see.
Okay. Yep.
See what you're saying.
All right, you guys are reading it closely.
Absolutely. We got some astute groups.
Excellent.
All right. Let's see, as we're waiting on just a few other folks to come in here. All right, we're going to go over our data validity grades, and then we're also going to use this opportunity to look at this point. We'll want to look at an audit that is fully populated with grades, and so our dashboard will have some will actually be populated, and we can look at some of those results. So let's see here. Let me just get a couple screens in order. And Will, I'm going to ask you to help walk us through the data validity and the dashboard.
That sounds good, Drew. Give me just a moment and I'll get that up, the fully populated. There we go. All right, too many windows open, Drew. You know anything about that?
I do. I do.
Stand by for just a moment. Interesting. Yeah, the one I've got pulled up was not giving me the dashboard. So Drew, I'll take the one you just sent me. Steve, you can tell him that joke, you know, while I'm getting this up.
You mean the one about, what do you call a cow in the front yard?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Anybody? The cow in the front yard?
I've got nothing.
Well, of course, it's the lawnmower.
I was going to say home.
I like it. Absolutely. Love it. That's all I got. That's, you know, so.
All right. While you were telling that amazing joke, I figured out why mine wasn't displaying correctly. So I've got it figured out. Thank you, Steve, for that extra minute. All right. Okay, let's go to a review. I think what we want to do is to do a review of the. Let's do this actually. It sounds well in our breakout. We did a little bit of okay for county water utility. What would it look like? But we also reflected a bit more about these interactive data grading questions and what they would mean for our tribal utility setups. So, Drew, did you guys do any of that, touching on connecting the dots?
We did, Will, and not so much in water supplied, but when it got down to authorized consumption, where we know there's some differences in the way the common exercise was designed, or what county water utility was doing compared to what our tribal utilities are doing as far as their authorized consumption. So we talked about that when they are putting together this audit, in the exercise, the billed metered was the largest volume in their authorized consumption. The unbilled unmetered was their smallest, but the way it's most likely going to play out with the Mescalero Apache tribe in Santa Clara is it'll be reversed. The largest volume is going to be that unbilled unmetered.
Good deal. Steve, how about in your group? Did y'all get a chance to connect the dots?
We did.
Great.
Some good connects regarding the metering type that was there,
yeah,
and how that data was uploaded through the beacon process and so forth. So some good touches there.
Okay. Well, what I'll maybe do, what I'd like to do, Drew, you tell me if this is okay. I was going to go to the dashboard and kind of talk us through how I would approach it and how we would want to think about approaching interpreting what we see, and maybe spend less time on the granular questions unless we, we'll go over it up, see if folks have questions about that. But I know we'll also be working in the coaching after this week, one-on-one. But let me pause and ask maybe if folks did have any of those questions that you wanted to tee up and ask about, or talk a bit more about in any of the breakout rooms, from the breakout rooms. All right. I'll just leave it that we had a good discussion with ours of we really liked that once you get all the visible questions answered, and we also were refreshing ourselves that what we're looking for is just the best fit answer. So we may not find an answer that perfectly fits our scenario, but we're just looking for the best fit answer. And so when we went through that process, it tells us which of the, one, it calculates the data validity grade for that input. And it also tells us if we wanted to improve that grade, which criteria would we focus on? And looking at, okay, maybe if we did something to improve the answer or get to the next answer up, or the next best answer, what would that do in terms of our data grade? And we did a little sensitivity check there. You know, here we had a grade that would go from a 6 to a 7 if we could review the data more often on our supply volumes. And we would improve the grade, and then we would also have a new set of practices we could look at if we wanted to go higher than that. So this now becomes not only a tool to assess how are we doing now, but also a tool to say what could we do to improve. So it's a really good planning tool from that perspective. And this is specifically around improving data, this interactive data grading. So once you've got all of the data grading questions answered, our color signals tell us that all the buttons are either orange or clear. Clear just means it's not applicable. But if it's orange, then that means it's good to go. We had one that we were missing earlier, and we noticed we had a white button, and that white is a signal that there's some questions that remain, and we want to make sure we go back and cover those. But once you get all of the visible questions answered, then the orange signal tells you we're good to go. And once you've got all oranges or clears, we then can go to the dashboard. So let's now think about, this is for county water utility, but I want to do it as an example of how you would interpret some of this information coming off of our cool fighter jet dashboard. The top left is our data validity, and our total score comes out at a 66. And the more important conclusion is that puts us into the upper end of this third tier. And this is a total score of potential of 100. 100 is not the best number, Drew, even though your son has told us that it is. The best number is a data validity score that truly reflects the practices that you have in place now when you're doing the audit. But the reason that's the best number, 66, if it's a truly and honestly applied score, it's the best number because that gives you the most clarity on what you need to do next. So here we've got a couple things we can think about. Our loss control planning is the next tab over, and if we click on that, it says, okay, you're in a tier 3. Think about, this is a real high level, think about collecting data for the audit. You might look at, if you don't have policies for data collection, establishing those. If you do have some in place, maybe look at refining how you're doing that. And in our breakout room, we had a nice discussion about policies for collecting the well meter readings. They both do, it's tied to SCADA, so it is feeding those to a SCADA system, but they also do manual reads every day. And we've had a nice discussion around, well, which data is it that you're pulling from when you're putting this water audit together? And really thinking about what those policies are. Short-term loss control, long-term loss control. This is giving high-level guidance on, in the current budget year, what are some things you can think about doing? And if you haven't done any leakage control activities, you can begin to look at that. In a tier 3, we're at least confident enough in the audit results to begin to do short-term planning activities. Long-term planning, it's more about maybe looking at the cost benefits, but not really making large capital decisions yet. And then in target setting, it's okay to maybe look down the road, but we probably need to think about improving our data validity before we get to more short-term targets. Right now, our dashboard says that we're at, and I'm going to jump ahead for a moment, it says that we're at about 44 gallons per connection per day. And based on the typical ranges in North America for systems of all sizes, this is a little above the median. And that just at least tells us where we are. It doesn't tell us where our target is or where we're trying to get to or what would make sense for us to invest. That really gets back to the cost side of things. but that at least puts us in context. We have a leakage index of 3, so we're at about, or almost 3. So we're at about 3 times the technical minimum. And just at a glance, that tells us that we do have some room physically to reduce leakage in our system. We still need to consider the cost situation, and we need to look at the cost of that leakage. And that's why we have this component over here, which is our side-by-side non-revenue water components, which tells a very interesting story in our county water utility scenario. Real losses are the largest volume portion of all of the NRW, non-revenue water components. Remember, non-revenue water is made up of 3 boxes: unbilled, use, apparent losses, and real losses. And then the apparent losses are subdivided into 3, and the unbilled is subdivided into 2. So that's where you get to your 6 boxes essentially on this are the total real losses. It's a rolled up number, one number for total leakage. And then the subcategories for apparent losses and unbilled consumption. What we see here is that we got volume. By volume, it's the largest, but by cost, it's actually not the largest, and it's actually one of the smaller ones. And that's because in this case, we have a very low unit cost of leakage. But we have the opposite story going on with those meter-related inaccuracies. And while this is going to be true for some of the tribal utilities and not true for others, if you have billed and metered consumption, then this relationship may be there for you, where you have a smaller volume, but based on what you charge those customers for their usage, any inaccuracies on those meters may be expensive for you. You may be missing a notable amount of revenue. That's what's going on in this case. And so if we're the county water utility, we see that clearly meter-related losses is our highest priority. From a volume standpoint, while the cost may not be the biggest piece of the picture, from a volume standpoint, we have an opportunity to reduce leakage. And we may think about doing that even if the cost case isn't the driving factor. Let's say our water plant or our wells are nearing their capacity. We may look at this and say, well, gosh, we've got a lot of waste and loss in the system. We could look to reduce that to avoid having to drill another well. So this could be a supply strategy in addition to just lowering our operating cost overall. So those are some key conclusions that I would take away if I was the manager here in the county water utility. My data validity is pretty good. I probably can map out some steps to improve, but I'm also at a point where I can start making some operational decisions about should I spend time, effort, and money on looking at reduction in leakage or reduction in apparent losses, and if so, what order? I want to work on the red box first, and then maybe move to the blue box. Drew, the last thing I'll mention, and then I'd love to open up for questions, is if I want to improve this data, back to that granularity in the data criteria. One thing I like to look at is on the worksheet at the very bottom left, there is a section called priority areas for attention to improve data validity. And this tool is smarter than I am. It does an algorithm to look at if you were to improve the data grade in these top 3 categories, this would have the greatest impact on your overall score. And it says volume from all sources is the #1 thing, and the next ranking item is billed and metered. So I can then go to those items on these specific data questions, and again get back to that limiting criteria. Okay, I'm at a 7. If I wanted to improve it, because it tells me that that's the most impactful thing I could do for data validity. If I want to improve it, then these are the limiting criteria I'd need to advance the answers in each of these limiting criteria. So I'm now getting very granular information to make good plans about the next 12 months, the next 36 months. What do I need to be working on to focus on? Drew, let's pause it there. I'd love to hear from folks if this is bringing any questions to mind. Again, we're looking at county utilities numbers, but you're going to have a fighter jet dashboard when you get through with your first level 1 validated audit, and it's going to look I mean, it's going to look similar. You're going to have some profiles, volumes, and costs side by side. You're going to have a data validity score, and you're going to have a dashboard of these both cost metrics and volume-based key performance indicators. Let's open up for questions from the group, reactions, etc. Checking the chat as well. All right, not hearing anybody so far. That's a-okay. We're excited to get to what your dashboard is going to look like and your specific situation. But the great part is this is a tool that is going to produce a dashboard for systems large and small, systems that meter and bill, systems that don't meter and bill. I mean, the dashboard is intended to convey this in a way that's going to be useful. So excited to get to that step for sure.
Fantastic. Thanks, Will. All right. So you guys may have picked up that we're incrementally turning up the dial a little bit, starting from the water balance on day one, developing the inputs, that step-by-step process that Will walked us through, and then applying it in that common exercise. Introducing the concept of data validity, understanding that it's not a measure of accuracy, but it's more qualitative. We're looking at those practices and policies within your tribal utility, and then also getting some application in through the common exercise that we just completed there. All of those common exercises, again, are what we're hearing is it's already getting you guys thinking about how that's going to work in your system. What data do you feel like you have a good handle on? What data do you might be a little bit suspect or might have a lower level of reliability? And understanding that wherever that data is a good place to start. Whether that, we're not looking whether that data validity score is specifically a 30 or a 70, but establishing that starting point is one of our immediate goals here through this process. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about on that concept of data validity. And let's see here. There we go. So Steve mentioned, he talked to us, he introduced the concept of data validity and how it goes into the water audit software. We just got hands-on with it in that exercise. And here's where Steve left off, just letting us know that any uncertainty that we have in the data going into the water audit is going to translate to some uncertainty of our results that we're getting in our water losses. So those common sources of error, instrumentation, databases, human error, or just lack of information or missing information there. So we've mentioned that level 1 validation. You've heard that term several times now. And that's what I'm going to round out our discussion on data validity here. And level 1 validation is a third-party review of and interview and discussion and evaluation of your water audit, your completed water audit, and the supporting documentation used to prepare it. And that is a process that each of the tribal utilities on the line today and in this workshop will be going through in the next phase of our program. But to introduce the concept of validation, there are three levels of validation. There's a level 1 validation, which you will be engaged with us in this program. But there are other levels of validation that are more indicative of those that technical analysis that we saw in that big picture slide that we've shared several times beyond the water audit, but looking at more advanced validation, maybe through more deeper data analysis or going and getting additional information out in the field. But the level 1 validation, our two objectives there are that we're tasked with is making sure that we are looking at the supporting documentation, making sure that it is error-free before bringing it into the water audit, and also making sure that we're doing such in line with the M36 methodology. What we're also doing is assessing those data validity grades. You will have each utility will have a designated water audit validator who will also be your coach in the next session, next segment of the program. So they'll be walking you through an interview style meeting and asking questions about your practices and policies, so we can get to an understanding of what is the best data validity grade, what's the most appropriate data validity grade for your system. So there have been a series of reports done to better understand how realistic water audits have been in the past. The Water Research Foundation, I think it was 2014, 2015. At the time, there were thousands of water audits just circulating around. They were interested in finding out how realistic are the results. So they did the research. They compiled a bunch of water audits, and they found that a lot of them were not too realistic, right? So there are some. I'm highlighting some fields from this study, but some of these terms on the left are going to be familiar to you, like customer retail unit cost. That's that cost that we are attributing to our apparent losses, right? It's basically the composite cost that your customers pay if you have any billed customers. So $180,000 per 1,000 gallons. That is certainly a unrealistic input there. But look over on the bottom left of that column, negative losses, right? I think we can all agree that negative losses is an unrealistic result in calculating your water losses. It's not plausible. So what this research study concluded was there needs to be a formal process in which a third party can validate these water audits. So then the Water Research Foundation put together this manual where they formalized this process of validating a utility water audit. So again, that is a process or a practice that you guys are going to be engaged with in the next phase of this program. And it's going to be a level 1 validation, looking at your water audit after you put it together. So a couple things. What does a level 1 validation do? Again, it confirms the information that is carried over from the supporting documentation correctly into the water audit. So finding any of those gremlins that Will's team found in the breakout exercises, if we're calculating some of those inputs correctly, so making sure that the information is brought in correctly, but also addressing and assessing those individual data validity grades. So it's more robust than just walking through each of those drop-down menus that you saw and saying, I see you selected this, is that right? I see you selected this, is that right? But it's going to be a more in-depth conversation, understanding the things surrounding those questions that make up your practices and policies within your system, to let us know that they have been appropriately selected, those data validity grades. But there's some things that a level 1 validation does not do also. So it's not correcting any inaccuracies that you have in the raw data. It might pinpoint some areas that may need attention, but it's not correcting any inaccuracies in the raw data that affect that summary level information. It's not going to investigate anything as far as your data processing and handling to identify the correct inaccuracies. we're not going to build the level 1 validation is not going to build the real losses from a bottom-up approach. But you guys have seen through this water balance approach how we calculate the real losses in this through the water audit, and we will just make sure that we're applying the M36 methodology correctly in your water audit to quantify those real losses. So it's not a bottom-up approach, but it's a top-down approach. So there are some things that the level 1 validation does, and some things that it does not do. So you may be wondering what does this level 1 validation look like? And so we have just a little bit of time that Steve and I would like to give you a little bit of a peek of once we have this session with you guys, what that process might look like. So just kind of a little bit of a role play, if you will, of what you can expect in a level 1 validation setting. But before we tee this up, after this week's workshop, you guys will have we've set aside probably around the July-August timeframe for you guys to meet with us for your level 1 validation. In between all that time is time to gather data, compile the audit, and meet with your water audit coaches on regularly scheduled times and as needed to cover any questions that you might have. So just know that there's ample time to do this. We know you guys have 1,000 other priorities, but want to make sure everybody's comfortable with having plenty of time to gather this information and confer with their coaches through this program. But that's all to say that at the end of the next phase, this coaching phase, will be this level 1 validation that Steve and I would like to introduce to you here through a little bit of role play. So I'm going to let Steve come off mute and just give a little bit of a tee up for this while I'm getting some screens set up here.
Thank you, Drew. So really in the validation process, and you'll see this when we go through it with you, it's the way to ask questions about the data and working it through. And what we have found as we have been teaching other utilities about this is doing it in role play with asking questions that are really pertinent to the utility of how they operate, and the way in which you are going about asking the questions, searching a little bit further. Can I get a copy of the test report? In our group, we had a really good discussion about that. Very, very helpful of being able to, one, you're not putting your teammates within the utility kind of on edge because everybody's busy. Everybody's got a lot of things that they're working on, but just having a conversation and going a little deeper about the data and almost guaranteeing that you're going to find things that weren't necessarily being tracked or that may have been tracked in error. And so by asking the questions, that's how you can really uncover those. So Drew, I don't know how much more time you need, but I think it'd be great just to sort of get into it if we could.
Let's do it, Steve.
You're gonna be the validator. I'm gonna be the utility. Is that the way this is gonna work?
That's right. Yep. So Steve is going to assume the role of the utility, and I'm going to be walking him through this level 1 validation process. So we're just gonna hit the first input in the water audit, volume from end sources. Just to give you guys an idea, this process usually takes this interview style process usually takes anywhere from 2 to 2.5 hours to go through all the information and working with manipulating the data on the screen in real time. So to give you guys an idea of the depth that goes into this, we'll just take a look at one of the inputs at this time. All right, so Steve, I think this is when they're like in the show business. It's like, all right, scene. Okay, you ready? All right. Sorry, let me get my screen sharing here. All right, hey Steve, how are you doing today?
Doing great, doing great.
All right.
I've had a full day of training. I'm excited. I'm jacked up, ready to go.
All right, fantastic. I hope it's with that Kavanaugh crew. They're a good bunch.
Yes.
Hey, so we're here to discuss conduct your level 1 water audit validation. You've provided some good information for us, and what we're looking to do with this validation is to confirm how the inputs were derived and confirm the data grades. So to do that, we'll be referring to your sporting documentation that you provided, and also I'll be asking some questions. As we go through it, if you decide it makes sense to adjust any input or grade, that's okay, and it's normal for this process. If I ask you something that you don't know offhand, we can tag that as a homework item. But our goal will be to complete everything in this interview today, so you don't have any homework items. So first, just have to say, I noticed that you used the new version of the AWWA water audit software, version 6. What are your thoughts on this new version?
Well, I like it. I had seen version 5, but hadn't used it in the past. And version 6 was my introduction to the audit, first time I've done it. It seemed fairly straightforward.
All right. Great. Well, the main difference you might have noticed is in the way in which these data grades are assigned.
Yeah, I like how there were drop-down menus for responses. You know, I don't know if I chose the right answers, but it certainly made it easier as we went through it.
Fantastic. And no problem on that. That's why we're here today. So any big picture questions before we dive in?
No, good to go.
All right. So let's start by confirming the boundaries of this audit. It looks like this is for a calendar year 2020.
That's right.
Okay. All right, next, let's look at the physical boundary of the water audit. So typically the water audit should begin where treated water is put into the distribution system. So let's look at your schematic, and if you would, just kind of walk me through how treated water is measured after it leaves the plant.
Okay, so the plant output is what comes through the filters, and we've got 15 of those. 15 finished water goes into the clear well, and we have 5 high service pumps that pull the water from the clear well and send that to distribution. Then we also have water that we use for backwash and other plant uses. Okay,
all right, thanks, Steve. Now, quick check, you mentioned 15 filters, but I'm seeing 16 on the schematic.
Yep, we've got a filter to waste line that's metered.
Okay, the schematic shows a backwash line, a cooling line, and a plant line, all downstream of the filter meters. Is that right?
Yep. Each of those lines are tapped off between the filter gallery and the clear well.
Okay, all right. And how about the 5 meters downstream of the clear well?
So we've got 5 mag meters. They were just installed, one after each high service pump, but we also have 5 connections with neighbor utility, and those are metered.
Okay. I'm wondering if those 5 meters on the schematic are actually those export meters. When did those high service meters get installed?
I think they were installed late 2020, but I'm not exactly sure when.
Okay. So maybe it sounds those meters after the clear well it sounds like they're newly installed and wouldn't have been the source of the supply meters in this audit. We'll take a look at your volume from own sources and the supporting documentation in just a minute.
Okay, that might be why those aren't shown on the schematic yet.
Okay. Let's hold off on talking about those export meters. Let's first wrap up the plant meters. So in addition to this plant, do you have any other of your own water sources, like any wells in the system?
No wells. All of our water comes from the plant. We do have a connection with Metro Water, but that's only for emergencies.
Okay, got it. I'll note that one and we'll come back to that. So now, Steve, let's take a look at your your backup numbers for the plant volume from own sources, and look at the supporting documentation together. Looks like so we've got some familiar terms here and categories: total filtered, backwash, surface wash, filtered to waste, that we've already looked at on your schematic. It looks like you're calculating this volume starting with the total filtered minus the rest of the columns. So we have on your water audit, it's 4878, and it looks like that's where you're getting that from.
Yeah, surface wash line is a separate takeoff between the filter gallery and the backwash line.
Okay, and what about these storage changes? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So the storage changes are for the clear well. We figure that by the tank level at 8 a.m. each day, and then we compare that to the first day of the month to the month before.
Okay. All right. So again, looks like we're starting with your total filtered, and then we're backing out the backwash, surface wash, filter to waste, and plant meter, and the cooling water, and then incorporating that storage change. All right. So looks like the numbers check out there. I'd recommend that for your volume from own sources, we use the filter meters, and all of those off takes downstream of those meters. Let's treat those as unbilled metered authorized consumption, since those have those volumes have entered in your water audit boundary. We need to account for them somewhere.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So we'll need another file showing the monthly volumes by filter meter, but that can be a homework item.
Okay, we've got that info and I can send it to you.
All right. So let me go ahead and make that adjustment in our audit. So we're going to use the filter meters at 5169,774. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about your practices around your supply metering and your data management. If you could, just tell me about the meter reading, how the meter reading happens, and where that gets recorded.
So all of our meters are tied to SCADA, and they read it and record it in SCADA.
Okay. When you say they read it, are you referring to the SCADA system records it automatically, or is someone also doing some manual reads for the meters too?
The flows are recorded in our SCADA system, and also we've got remote readout that's recorded daily by the operator. And I think they check those numbers quarterly, once a quarter.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about that, the checking of the meters. Do you know exactly what's involved in that process?
I'm not sure. They do something with the meter and the SCADA, but I'm not sure.
Okay. So there's actually two tests we need to consider. The first, Steve, is a volumetric accuracy test. That's a precise and independent measurement in the current field conditions against the subject meter. And the other test is electronic calibration. That's the alignment of the flow range conversion with signal span output. So checking that 4 to 20 milliamp signal span and the SCADA output. So do either of those test methods sound familiar?
Yeah, actually it's the electronic signal, and we do that annually. They're doing calibration between the meter and the SCADA. We also perform a quality check on the data that's recorded by the operator and the flows in the SCADA.
Okay, great. That's helpful to understand that we're checking for any data transfer errors at the secondary and tertiary devices. I noticed there weren't any records of that in what you provided. Do you know if there's any documentation available for the records from those annual calibrations?
I'm not sure. I've never seen of it, if it is.
Okay. All right, no problem. Since that particular documentation is part of your required supporting documentation if it's applicable, then what we'll do is we'll look at adjusting that data grade for this audit. If that documentation does become available for the next audit, we'll want to revisit that based on what the documentation shows. And to confirm, are you aware if the filter meters have ever been volumetrically tested?
Not that I know of.
Okay. All right. All right. So we'll need to look at the data validity grading criteria here. So we'll take another look at some of these responses. We meet the annual practice of electronic calibration, but we don't meet that practice for the accuracy testing, the volumetric accuracy testing. And further, whether we have test results from the supply meter testing as supporting documentation, it does have an impact on the data grade. So I'll make a note in the validation sheet to track down those calibration reports, and that can be an action item for next year's audit. Does all that make sense?
It does.
Great. All right. And scene, Steve. So guys, that was just a really quick and watered down version of what these level 1 validations sessions look like. You know, again, we're not going through in my role as a validator, I'm not going through and just asking Steve if these responses that he's selected in the data grading are correct or not. But I'm learning more about his system and really just getting him to describe the practices and policies. And that in itself will kind of organically confirm that we have made the correct selections in the interactive data grading matrix, or let us know whether we need to talk a little bit more about some aspects of it and maybe even adjust the grade or the responses here. And you also notice that Steve didn't have an answer for every question that we're talking about. So that reinforces the need to have the appropriate staff members on the call. So if it's just one person on the call, even though you might wear many hats, if we're talking about supply meter testing, or if we're talking about just the way the water is treated and measured as it's leaving the plant, you need to have we want to have the right person on the line to speak to that. Same goes for any questions around billing, for example, or any consumption metering. But so that was a little bit of the format of what you can expect in the level 1 validation. Again, we're going to have a lot of time before we get to that level 1 validation session to interact with each other. So we're already going to know a lot about your system before we get on the call with you. But our job as a coach is to help you prepare your supporting documentation and help you prepare your water audit. And then we'll still have some validation aspects that we'll meet on that level 1 validation call. So that was just one input. Every input is going to look a little bit different. All right. So just a quick check at the time, guys. I think that this is a good time to hit our summary and wrap up and share the day 3 evaluations with you. But I want to open it up one last time to see if you guys had any questions about that mock level 1 validation that we just conducted, the concept of data validity, or the developing the inputs. That's a lot that we covered in day 3. So any final questions before we wrap it up for today?
One quick comment, Drew. Again, in the mock validation, what I think we were trying to also really drive home is, as you said, there may be these questions that, for the first time you're sort of asking them, and going through them, and it's a-okay because we inherited these water utilities. But in the questions, there's also education. We talked about that in our group. As it comes up, and that's something of, I don't know what that means. And so it sort of helps you understand next best practices. Mm-hmm. So just an observation there.
You know, I like what you said there, Steve, and that's important, and we'll be sure to continue to reinforce this. Often, so with any audit, I would say financial audit, water audit, the you know, by the nature of it, it can appear as just an exercise of what are you not doing. Right. That is very much not the approach that we're taking here. We want to celebrate the good things that you guys are doing, the good practices that you have, but using this tool as a means to identify some of those areas where you might insert some practices to improve your data validity. They're all suggestions. No one, as a result, nothing is saying that, you know, you have to start testing your meters every year. But it's a consideration that's put forth and for you to prioritize as it best suits your system. All right, great point there, Steve. All right, open it up. Didn't have any questions from the participants, but I'll just open it up one last time for any of the Kavanaugh team members. Any final comments for day 3 here? All right, hearing none.